Well, good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30, so it's time for me to open today's hearing sessions into the examination of the South Tyneside local plan. Welcome, everybody, to this venue for the hearings. Just to introduce myself, my name is David Spencer, and I'm the independent inspector appointed to examine the soundness and legal compliance of the submitted plan. And this is the plan that was published early in 2024 for representations into, as I say, the soundness and legal compliance of the plan. Can I just check that everybody can see me and where necessary, obviously everybody can hear me and where necessary see me? Yep, the speakers are working. Good, thank you. Can I please ask at this stage that people ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent settings, please? And can I please invite at this early stage the council to just advise what we need to do if the fire alarm goes off and whether we're due a test today and any other housekeeping matters. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. We're not expecting a fire alarm this morning, so if alarm does go off, please can you meet me to the nearest fire exits, which just are on the far side of the room there. And then if you could make your way to the far side of the car park and then await instruction from hotel staff. Toilets are just in the corridor just outside, directly opposite this room. Please note that there are cables taped to the floor around the room, so just be careful when you're walking around not to trip on any of those. Also, the hotel operates a park and eye system in the car park, so if you have parked your car there, please ensure that you've entered your registration details in the tablet at the hotel reception as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can I check? These sessions are being recorded by the council and I think being uploaded onto the council's examination web pages, but does anybody else this morning wish to make their own recording of this event? No. Can I just check, is there anybody here present from the press today, please? No. Okay. Thank you. Now, these are meetings that are held in public, so people are welcome, as I can see in the audience, to observe the event this morning. They are, to say, also being recorded, but it is only people who are seated around the table who've expressed their right to be heard. Alongside, obviously, I'll be hearing from the council, who have the right to speak at these meetings. These are not wider public open meetings for everybody to kind of chip in. With that in mind, obviously what I will endeavour to do is obviously ensure that everybody who is seated around the table has the right to be heard. It's important that when we make contributions that they are reasonably to the point. They're on the issue that we are discussing in relation to the agenda that's already been published and circulated separately. That agenda reflects my matters, issues and questions, which were based on all the various representations that were submitted on the plan back in early 2024. People do not need to necessarily read out or repeat what has already been provided within your statements. Please take those taken as read. What I'm hoping for is that we get a reasonable kind of discussion. And what I really want to understand and hear from people around the table, particularly from seated to my left and at the back of the table, is if you think the plan, or you obviously consider that the plan is not sound, why that I should draw a similar conclusion, and what needs to change to the plan in order for it to be made sound. And obviously the council will be rebutting or defending their particular position. When people do make contributions, please use the microphone so that people in the room and those observing the hearings can listen and can hear what is being said. I will try and generally direct questions to particular people to try and bring you into the conversation on particular points relevant to your representations. But if there is a particular point you wish to make as the discussion is moving along, and before I potentially move off a point, the convention is to upend your nameplate, and then I'll seek to bring you in as close as possible to that particular part of the discussion. Now, there are obviously profoundly or divergent views, or profoundly held divergent views on this plan and what it should be doing. Those who are vehemently opposed to the growth and the locations that are put forward within the plan. We'll also be hearing from those who think that the plan may need to go further or should go further in terms of additional growth. Please can we treat everyone with respect and allow everybody to make their points and treat others as we would wish to be treated ourselves. Does anybody have any brief questions on just how the mechanics or how these hearings work? I think people were here yesterday to observe day one, so you've probably got a gist of how these things work. No, thank you. Well, in which case, can I, before we get into the agenda, and we're here this morning to really look at matter 2 and the issues 1 and 2, which is first going to look at the plan period, and then the main substance for this morning's discussion will be around housing need and the amount of housing that this plan should be seeking to accommodate and plan for over the plan period. But can I first invite the Council, probably through Mr Shadarivian, to introduce who I'm likely to be hearing for on behalf of the Council for this morning's session, please.
Yes, good morning, sir. My name is Paul Shadarivian, KC, and I act for the Council. And I'm going to ask the various witnesses to introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Deborah Lamb. I'm the Operations Manager for the Spatial Planning Team at South Tyneside Council.
I'm Kate Nichols, Director of Planning at LUC and led on the Sustainability Appraisal.
Good morning, Michael Bullock from ARC4, who prepared the Strategic Housing Market Assessment.
Yeah, I then should have said, now once you've heard, I wasn't sure if on the end you were part of the Council's team, but I see from your nameplate you're not. So what I'd like to do now is then work our way around the table if people can introduce themselves. I think Mr Martin, you'll have to explain. You've got obviously two potential hats. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone. I'm Joanne Harding from the Home Builders Federation.
Hi everyone, I'm James Thompson, Development Planner at Banks.
Hi everyone, I'm Neil Westwick, a Senior Director at Litchfields, representing Avant Homes.
Morning, I'm Neil Morton, the Director at Savills, representing Lavery Coal Farm Limited.
I'm Christopher Martin. I'm from Pegasus Group. I'm representing both Bellway Homes Limited, who are strategic arm of Bellway, and Bellway Homes Limited North East, who are the divisional office of Bellway.
Morning all, Lee Fulcher, Principal Planner at DPP. We're representing Stonebridge Homes.
Morning, Kevin Ayrton from ELG Planning, representing Story Homes.
Good morning, I'm Dave Hutchinson, the Secretary of East Bolton Neighbourhood Forum. With your permission, Chair, can I give a little bit of background to the Neighbourhood Forum so that everybody understands what we are, what we represent, if that's possible?
I think we have got time this morning. I would, as long as it's a very sort of brief overview. I mean, as I said, I've read representations, but if you can keep it fairly succinct, Mr. Hutchinson.
Yeah, just a few points which I think are quite fundamental to the points we're going to make during the inquiry. The East Bolton Neighbourhood Plan was supported in a referendum which was held in October 2021. 1,432 votes were cast in total, with 1,362, which was 95%, in favour of the plan and only 70 against. That's a turnout of 42%, which is better than the turnout in recent local elections. The forum area includes about 1,800 houses in East Bolton. The key issues for the neighbourhood plan include the importance of the natural and built environment, the heritage of the area, and the role the green belt plays in protecting this. The plan includes a settlement boundary, largely to protect the character of the village and to address the key issues identified by our community consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's, again, somebody, Mr. Butler, please, next.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Mervyn Butler. I'm Secretary of the Clean East Bolton Labour Party, and I'm also a member of East Bolton Neighbourhood Forum.
Councillor David Herbert for the South Tyneside Green Party.
Thank you for those introductions. So if I can invite people now to turn to my previously circulated agenda. This will then, as I say, link back to my previously published matters, issues and questions that were released early in May of this year. And there are the two issues, as I want to cover this morning. The first is the plan period, and then we'll move on to the housing need, but often the two are interlinked. In terms of the plan period, my overarching question, and I'll invite the council to come in on this first, in terms of particularly how you responded to my matters issues questions 2.1, is whether it would be necessary for soundness to extend the plan period. Obviously, I'm reading the plan period as running from 1st of April 2023 through to the 31st of March 2040, so intending to give a 17-year period. But as many people seated around the table will recognise, the National Planning Policy Framework in relation to strategic policies at paragraph 22, I think, says that plans, particularly where they contain strategic policies, and this is a plan that clearly identifies a number of strategic policies, should look ahead over at least a 15-year period from plan adoption. Now, as we sit here now, obviously there's a way to go with this examination, but assuming a fair wind and we make good progress and I'm able to issue a report, I mean, I think realistically adoption would be at some point in 2026. So I understand those submissions who are advocating or articulating that the plan period should be extended. But I would like to invite the council perhaps pick out some of the key points it's raised in its response to MIQ 2.1 as to why the council feels there are particular circumstances relating to South Tyneside that mean the plan period as submitted can still be considered to be a sound one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As you've referenced in our response to the MIQ question, the council has set out that we consider the current plan period of 2023 to 2040 should not be modified and should be kept as it is for the plan going forward. I think there are circumstances which justify that. I think everyone in the room is well aware of the delays of the plan and being submitted. So the local development scheme, which was prepared at Regulation 19, set out that the plan would be at examination summer 24 and identifies a proposed adoption period of summer 2025. Now, obviously, that hasn't happened, and we are obviously in examination now in 2025, and therefore that has had knock-on effects in terms of the plan period as it was set out at Regulation 19. The LDS that we submitted along with the submission of the local plan identifies an adoption, I say, in 2026. I think the timescales there are generous in terms of identifying that period, which says later 26, to take into account uncertainties around the examination period. But I say examination has happened earlier than what we set out in the LDS as well, so there could be some flexibility around that in terms of what is remaining of the plan period at the point of adoption. I think another important point to set out is that the plan has been submitted under transitional arrangements, and therefore at the point of adoption there will be a requirement for the plan to be reviewed to take into account the MPPF, which was published in December 2024. I think as well, it's also important to recognise the evidence base which has been prepared to support this local plan does not extend beyond the 2024 end of the plan period. I think the council recognises that should the plan period be extended, it would mean that there would be a significant amount of work that would have to be undertaken to support that change in the plan period, which would lead to additional delays in terms of being able to get a plan adopted. So we considered that the approach that we've taken and keeping the plan period as it is probably going to be the most efficient way of getting a plan adopted for the council.
Thank you. And just allied to that, before I bring in potential others on this issue of the plan period, I mean, the bottom line, I think, if I can sort of sum up the position of some of around the table in terms of extending the plan period is additional housing requirement that would need to be provided potentially over an additional year or 2 years. My rudimentary maths, if we accept the housing need figure, requirement figure, for South Tyneside would be about an additional, if it's another year, another 310, 2 years. Watch out for my lightning maths, 620. From the council's position, the reasonableness of saying, you know, the evidence base, does the evidence base exist to kind of, on the one hand, simply extrapolate that forward. Is there the evidence base that can support that, or is it really kind of tied to the 2040 kind of plan period in terms of what would need to be done? I don't know if the council could just potentially articulate what, if we were minded to go down a main modification of that what sort of things would need to be potentially unpicked or looked at further in more detail.
So shall I deal with this? I may be corrected by those who know better. We'll see. First and foremost, the evidence base is comprehensive. It has to be comprehensive. We are dealing here not only with housing numbers, but other development too, meeting the borough's development needs as a whole. That includes employment, social infrastructure, as well as physical infrastructure of all types. It's not simply a question of extrapolating the housing figure and then adding on a couple of sites. There would be a need to review the evidence base as a whole to see what impact extending the plan period would have on all development needs and the implications on infrastructure and the timing of that infrastructure. That process in itself could take quite a long time. So if it were to be engaged through a modifications process, there is a real possibility that it would extend to many, many months of extra work in order to make sure that the evidence base supported the further year or two of the plan period. So one has to look at the emergence of this plan and the issues that have beset it in order to understand whether or not there is justification for undertaking that course of action and not being able to anticipate at this stage what its implications and outcomes might be. That's the first point. Second point is if one goes back to the 2013 MPPF, and the policy has remained much the same and remains the same nonetheless. It says strategic policies should look ahead over a minimum 15-year period from adoption. It doesn't stop there. What it goes on to say is to anticipate and respond to long-term requirements and opportunities such as those arising from major improvements in infrastructure. So what it's saying is you need to look at it over this kind of period as a minimum in order to anticipate and respond to those issues. And it refers specifically to strategic policies. In that context, and the strategic policies which are being promoted through this plan are such that they're intended to meet the borough's needs for employment and housing land specifically over that period of time, albeit there is a shortfall of a year. The question is whether that objective is in some way materially compromised. My submission is that that policy objective is not materially compromised as a result of the planned period being a little shorter. Particularly in a context where there will be a requirement in any event to look ahead with a revised plan in short order, and likely also with a much higher housing requirement having regard to the assessed need. And just to reinforce that, the same policy in paragraph 22 goes on to say, where larger scale developments such as new settlements or significant extensions to existing villages and towns form part of the strategy, policies should be set within a vision that looks further ahead, at least 30 years, to take into account likely timescale for delivery. It's not saying that the planned period should be 30 years. It's asking for a vision. And what I'm suggesting is that that vision and the ability to anticipate and respond to long-term requirements is not compromised by the slight shortfall in the planned period, and that the advantages of proceeding with the current plan and its current period far outweighs the potential difficulties that may arise in trying to extend it at this stage. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. And I'm sure many around the table are aware, obviously, for plan examinations now, there's obviously the letter from the Minister to the Chief Executive of the Planning Inspectorate, 30th of July last year. So if there are to be any pauses to plan examinations, we're looking at a window of around about 6 months. So I need to bear that in mind if there's significant additional work or requirements likely or necessary to make a plan sound. Obviously, that sets out the council's position. Obviously, read your statements. I'm reasonably clear on your position. For those who do advocate or articulate that the plan period should be extended in light of national planning policy, is there anything further anybody around the table wishes to say in relation to what you've provided for your statements? And the council's kind of submissions that it's not simply a case of just being able to kind of extrapolate the housing requirement. That in itself would sort of like pulling at a loose end on a woolen jumper. It's going to unravel and take more time to kind of fix than perhaps people envisage. Mr. Westwick first, I think, please.
So it's just a brief point, not want to go over what you said, but essentially. What we seem to hear from the council is that there may be some, for starters, this is a problem the council's making in the delay in the plan. But essentially, what we've heard is it may be a little bit difficult to do the task, but all we heard was many months delay, not an elongated period for an infinite amount of time. My view is that, yes, it may be a slightly more difficult task, but I believe the MPPF is clear it is for a minimum of 15 years period the council haven't got. I don't think just because the task is slightly difficult and will cause some minor delay that it shouldn't be undertaken.
Can I invite Mr. Westwick, yourself and others? The council makes also the specific point, obviously this is a plan being examined against the September 2023 MPPF under transitional arrangements through the subsequent national planning policy framework. You know, this is an authority that's going to be expected to produce an updated local plan in quick order. Does that provide any assurance at this stage to find a plan with potentially 14 years plan period sound in that context?
I think from my point of view, sir, it unfortunately doesn't. I think history has demonstrated that South Tyneside do not produce plans in short order. We're sitting here today after an elongated process, so unfortunately that doesn't give me myself much comfort.
Thank you. I'll go to Mr. Ayrton next and then Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, again, just going back to paragraph 22, it's quite clear, requiring a minimum 15 years. It doesn't kind of go on and say unless justification is set out. Otherwise, it's quite clear in that point. And I think, pick up on Mr. Westwick's point, past lack of delivery, the evidence of that, delays in the current local plan process. If anything, there's more of a reason to at least do 15 years rather than reduce it, to give it that certainty. And it links to other points as well, such as safeguarded land, about planning ahead, to recognise that constraint the Greenbelt has had on delivery in South Tyneside. So yeah, I think it's quite clear that that minimum period should be targeted.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Martin, please.
Thank you, sir. To some degree, I have a little bit of sympathy with the planning officers, given the situation that we're in, as you've alluded to, sir, in terms of the letter and where we are and the delays that's had to the examination. But having said that, this is something that has been flagged, certainly in representations I prepared to the Regulation 19 stage, and I believe others round this table. At that point in time, we were saying the plan period was looking very tight, and any slippage would mean that you would be under that minimum 15-year period. So there was an opportunity at that point in time for the council to extend out that plan period. So it's not something that has suddenly sprung upon them to some degree. It's something that has been signalled and flagged through representations previously. From my point of view, I'd agree with Mr. Erdmay. There's areas of interpretation, areas of judgment. In this case, the MPPF is really clear that it's a minimum of 15 years from adoption. There's no ifs or buts or, exceptions or anything like that. So, and the PPG again is clear. The accompanying PPG, it talks about a minimum 15-year plan period. So that's talking about the bare minimum. Really, ideally, you should be looking even a bit further on than that. So, to my mind, they do need to extend the plan period, and I think it's pretty clear. I think there's an issue there that if you go ahead with a plan that's less, it could be challengeable potentially because it's not in accordance with national policy. And I know that the council have also raised the matter about, this is a transitional plan, it's a transitional arrangement, and that there will be a review in short order of the plan, given what the MPPF says. But are we not round this table today to test the soundness of this plan? And to some degree, we have to put aside the fact that there will be a review. Even if there is going to be a review, this plan itself has to be sound and has to be fit for purpose. Unfortunately, I think it is a situation where I think they need to be looking to extend the plan period. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, others may want to come in on this point, but I'll come back to you, Mr. Martin, as the last contributor. I say others may want to come back. I've heard from the council, from Mr. Shadaravian. I think you placed an emphasis on the word "should" within paragraph 22 of the MPPF. It's not a must. Obviously, it is a national planning policy document. So whether that's something that provides some flexibility in these circumstances, and whether, as you say, Mr. Martin is considering whether this plan is sound, and obviously the council consulted back in 2024. I appreciate there's been a passage of time, but at that time it consulted on and published what it considered to be a sound plan. Now, unfortunately, events mean we're sitting here now, I think probably much later than when the examination was originally envisaged. Does that provide kind of exceptional circumstances, as the council put as part of their reasoning to kind of not extend the plan period?
To my mind, no, because there's nothing within the MPPF or the PPG that talks about exceptional circumstances that allow authority to plan less than 15 years. If there was, I would imagine it would have been in there. There's a good reason why it's a minimum of 15 years, because you have to provide certainty for residents, certainty for businesses, and if you're planning over a shorter period, then that doesn't create that certainty for long-term investment. to my mind, should or must. I mean, that's splitting hairs there. They're two modal verbs and both are directing you to do something. You know, if it was more loose, they could have used could or may, but, you know, to me it's still pretty clear about what the government's intending local planning authorities to do.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, please.
Thank you, sir. We wouldn't want to see an extension to the plan period. We would support the position that the plan should go forward and the dates as it is. I think you've already just made the point about the period of the consultation on Regulation 19. I'd also make the point that from the residents' and public's point of view, the significant response to the plan was at Regulation 18, when the engagement was very much higher, and the frustration from our community that we're not in a position to have a plan in place. Obviously, we don't agree with everything that's being proposed, means that it's now important to get this plan in place, and anything that meant a further period, I think, would lead to more uncertainty. So we would certainly favour the plan period to be as is. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously mindful it's the council's plan. I don't know if the council wants to come back on anything that's been raised. I'm going to call them broadly the sort of development sector industry, as the or land promotion industry, is that's what they're doing. So, Mr. Shadowraven.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. It's working. Yeah, just very briefly. The MPPF is the Secretary of State's guidance, its policies, upon which you must place considerable weight. Of that there is no doubt. However, this process also involves the exercise of planning judgment, and you are here to exercise that judgment in a professional and objective way. And paragraph 22 does not preclude the exercise of that judgment, provided you give reasons for your recommendations having regard to the requirements of that policy. And that is a question of judgment for you. That's all I need to say about that. To also add, as a matter of practical experience, this is not the only plan that is seeking to go through or has gone through on the basis of a slight shortfall in the plan period. It's not uncommon.
Thank you. If I can pick up the second part of the issue around plan period that I'd identified in my matters, issues and questions, we've kind of, to one end of the spectrum, been looking at sort of the end date and whether that should be moved forward to 2041 or 2042. The other thought I was having, or have sort of applied in other plan examinations, is whether, given where we are, the plan period should be brought forward, given the use of the standard method for calculating housing need, applying the latest affordability ratios in terms of those being sort of forward-looking projections, and whether there was a soundness issue that the plan period also needed to be brought forward to reflect, as I say, the latest affordability ratio. And again, I'll invite the council to respond to this point in terms of the reasoning or the council's kind of view on why that wouldn't be necessary for soundness in this particular instance.
So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm Rachel Cooper, one of the senior policy officers at South Tyneside Council. As we set out in our hearing statement, the need of 309 dwellings is based on the 2022 affordability ratios. If we applied the 2023 affordability ratio, that would bring the need to 310 dwellings per annum. So I think it's the council's view that rebasing the plan for one additional dwelling per annum would not be proportionate. And given the reasons sort of we set out earlier in terms of the evidence base.
Thank you. Does anybody else have views on rebasing the start of the plan period? It's typically more an issue where the affordability ratio has gone in a different direction and points to high housing need, but I'm not hearing any kind of dispute from the council's analysis that it's roughly stayed the same, whether it's the 2022 or the 23 affordability ratios. Thank you. Before I just move off the plan period, obviously I've got to apply myself to this. Mr. Shadowraven says the judgments around whether this remains sound. I think I just want to just understand a little bit more, clearly understand why the point is being made about extending the plan period, and people are inviting me on that basis. It's a consistency with national policy, test of soundness in principally, but the consequence of that is, I think for most people sitting around the table, a higher housing number and requirement over an additional period. It will also have ramifications about whether we can extrapolate employment land figures over a similar period. The council indicated, I think Mrs. Lambs referred to, it would be months to kind of look at this. Can I just understand just a little bit more? I mean, we're looking at things like the infrastructure delivery plan, traffic modelling, in terms of trying to potentially accommodate an additional 300 or 600, circa 300, 600 houses and relevant hectareage of employment floor space.
Yeah, what would happen is before you got to the issue of considering infrastructure requirements and attendant requirements associated with the increased number, you'd first have to review the spatial strategy. Where are those additional houses going to come from? Should it be within the green belt? And if so, and as is most likely, if so, where within the green belt? So one would have then to undertake a further green belt review by way of an addendum to accommodate the extra number. And that would feed into the sustainability appraisal, which would then have to consider strategic options and then consider site-specific options in the way in which the SA has done so thus far. That work cannot all take place at once. There has to be a sequence. Once we've identified what that need is and what the spatial alternatives are, to consider then what the infrastructure requirements related to those alternatives is, so it can be SA'd. So it's a long process. One has to consider the resources which are available to the council to undertake that process. That's a material factor, because you can't assume that the resources will be there to achieve the outcome in a timely way. And then there is the issue of consultation and responding to that consultation, because any change through the modifications process has to be fair and give objectors the opportunity to make representations. And in order for it to be effective consultation, we have to take it into account in determining whether or not the choices made are appropriate, having regard to those responses. And the implications of that are manifold, but I think one can anticipate that there is a real risk, not just a risk, but a real risk that that process will take much longer than 6 months. And moreover, that we can't know what the outcome might be in terms of its impacts on other elements of the plan. I think that is an assessment that can be made on the basis of experience and common sense.
Thank you. I think just being devil's advocate for a moment with the council, and maybe others around the table might have a view. The council's looked at a lot of sites as part of this plan preparation process. They've been through sustainability appraisal. We'll come on to this as part of other discussions around the thoroughness of which the council has kind of looked at things, whether that to some extent kind of mitigates the kind of the timing implications of potentially looking for additional land supply. Put that on one side of the equation. I think what I would say to the room, and from experience drawn from other plan examinations, if additional supply is needed or is a consequence of a main modification, I can't think yet of a plan examination where that hasn't occurred, that consultation is carried out as part of any kind of pause. So it's not only a case of trying to, looking for that additional supply, going through the kind of various processes. It's also then carrying out probably at least a 6-week consultation, analysing that consultation responses. Can that reasonably be done within a 6-month pause window? But I think I give the council the I'm not saying the pudding is being over-egged, but is there a degree of evidence that exists already that would mean it would be relatively straightforward to identify additional supply?
If we were talking about circumstances where the plan period remained the same, but that you were of the view that it would be appropriate to include further sites in order to fulfill a proper requirement, having regard to the assessed need, then that will probably be fine, because that assessment has already been done. You can look at further sites and make judgments about the need for further infrastructure in those circumstances, and be satisfied that other elements of the plan would remain constant, notwithstanding the additional requirement. But here we're talking about an additional year on the plan period and its consequences. That could well have implications also for highways infrastructure assessment and modelling, for example, which has been done. I don't know is the answer, but there is a difference between the two. And it's not just a question of identifying further sites.
Thank you. Before I move off the issue of plan period and we get into the substance of housing need, are there any further submissions anybody wishes to make in relation to plan period and what I've just heard from the council? No. Okay, thank you. Leave that with me into my in tray of judgments to make. We now move on to issue 2. I should have said at the start, obviously we're sitting for this morning in relation to housing need. I will probably be taking a mid-morning break. You'll be pleased to hear at an appropriate time, so I'll signal when that is. That's likely to be in about 45 minutes time, but I want to start the discussion on the separate discussion on excuse me, housing need. And the first area I just want to start from, and just I don't think this is an issue of significant dispute, but in terms of just applying the standard method to derive local housing need, whether the output that's been identified as Ms Cooper has already referred to using the 2022 affordability ratios is 309 net new homes a year, whether that's soundly based. We'll come on to whether we should be using the standard method as the basis for deriving housing need. But starting from the starting point of National Planning Policy Framework says to use the standard method. Were we to do so, is the output reliably 309 dwellings per annum? Is it? I can't remember if it's Mr. or Dr. Bullock.
It's either.
Okay.
Dutch on a good day. Yes, in terms of running the standard method, then yes, 309 is the is the outturn figure.
And that's set out within the strategic housing market assessment in terms of the various kind of inputs that have gone into that, in terms of the affordability ratio using the 2014 household projections,
correct,
etc.
Yeah.
As I say, I don't think from looking around the table that specific output in itself is contested, but I'll just check that still remains the case. So in terms of then going to the sort of the next item on the agenda in terms of kind of the principle of using the standard method, as indicated, national planning policy. I think this is at when we go back to the September 2023 national planning policy framework. This is at paragraph 61. States to use the standard method and the component parts of the formula unless exceptional circumstances exist. And I think, as I tried to sort of set out in my agenda, I think the rationale for that is that I think from the government's perspective is to try and get a degree of consistency across the country in terms of how housing needs are calculated. But I think one of the areas that's clearly been raised within the representations, particularly from those seated on my left, is whether the use of the 2014 based household projections is reasonable and kind of justified in a South Tyneside context, whether there are exceptional circumstances to apply alternative projections as a starting point. And again, I think this refers to my matters issues questions 2.4. I presume again looking to Dr. Bullock as the, I don't know if I can call you the author of the SHMAR.
Indeed. I was going to suggest if we defer to Ms Cooper for the initial council position, and then if there's any further questions I can follow up on those.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, so the council haven't identified any exceptional circumstances to deviate from the 2014 household projections. The PPG is clear that 2014 based projections should be used and that they provide stability for planning authorities and communities and take into account historic under-delivery.
Thank you. And I think in terms of this, some of these specific issues around whether there are these kind of exceptional circumstances, it probably overlaps into sort of part of my agenda item 5. And we'll come on to this in terms of others who are pointing to kind of recent population figures. But it is sometimes put at plan examinations to use the 2008, why don't we use the 2018 household projections? But I understand the SHMAR has kind of looked at this, it's kind of sensitivity checked. What does that tell us? Is it kind of significantly different to the 2014 projections? Might there be reasons for this? I understand whether it's Ms Cooper or Dr Bullock, there are variant runs of the 2018 household projections that could give you a raft of kind of different answers, but there's one that's often referred to as kind of the principal run. And from my reading of the SHMAR, the outturn for that, for the 2018 projections, is not significantly different to the 2014. But I don't know if you're able to, somebody's able to assist on this particular point.
I'm happy to take that, sir. I think the point is that there's a very, PPG is very clear about the data to be used to assess future housing need. I think the point is that new data comes out quite frequently, quite regularly, and my considered view is whenever we're looking at new data coming out, it's to understand the kind of magnitudes and directions of data rather than the absolutes. And the point is that there is consistency in terms of the overall trends in population change affecting South Tyneside, which I think is the key point here. that you do get different sets of data coming out, but they're all pointing to a similar projection in terms of the kind of makeup and the character of a locality.
Thank you. And when I'm looking at this issue, I mean, I appreciate it is covered in some detail within the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, the SHMA. I mean, I was drawn to paragraph 240 to kind of draw that kind of particular conclusion around the kind of, as I describe it, the kind of the principal kind of output or run of the 2018 projections compared to the 2014. To kind of reveal that there's not that significant a difference in terms of the kind of, as you say, the kind of consistent picture.
Yeah, so I think as you were saying there, the paragraph 240 identifies that over the 10-year period from 2023 to 2033, under the 2014 projections, there's a rough household growth of 292 compared with 294 under the 2018 projections.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind of the move to standard method has taken a lot of the debate out of how we calculate and derive housing need. How I miss the days of objectively assessed housing need, which probably took a whole day. But nonetheless, I think whilst there's some recognition and support around the table for the applicate or how the standard method has been applied as the starting point for deriving housing need and ultimately the housing requirement for the plan in South Tyneside. There are those who take an alternative or invite that an alternative view is taken. I want to sort of touch upon items 5 and 6 of my agenda, particularly for East Bolden Neighbourhood Forum in terms of your representations. I know those are echoed by the local Labour Party and others as well, in terms of what population trends might be telling us, what recent population figures are indicating. If we look at the latest 2021 census, I think your view, or your forum's view, Mr. Hutchinson, is that there's been a picture of sustained population decline. That's still the picture, in your view, from the latest census outputs, which points to, I think you suggest through various figures within your statement or your forum statement, that the plans could potentially be over-providing or providing for housing need significantly in excess of what is actually, in your view, required. So if I can invite you to just outline the approach you would invite me to take, please.
Yes, sir, thank you. That's correct. Just a bit of background. In 2002, we wrote to the Secretary of State for levelling up housing in communities about the use of the standard method and whether there was any way that there were exceptional circumstances which could justify using another basis for calculation. The Secretary of State wrote back on the 20th of July 2022, and I'm quoting from his letter, which we submitted as an appendix to our submission. He said, "The standard method does not impose a target. It is still up to the local authority to determine its housing requirement, and this includes taking local circumstances and restraints such as the green belt into account." On that basis, we argue that there are exceptional circumstances for using a different figure. The population trend in South Tyneside has consistently been going down, and we now have the figures from the 2021 census, which show a much lower figure for projected households than either 2014 or 2018. So we are proposing that, given the flexibility conceded by the Secretary of State, the Council should use that lower figure from the 2021 census, which, if that was applied to the calculation, instead of 309 houses per year, that would give us a figure of 145 houses per year, which obviously is much less intrusive on the capacity and on the green belt of the borough.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. I think that then, looking at the forum's representations, you're saying that would, when we look at those figures, I think if I read your statement correctly, you'd be saying we'd need around about, or South Tyneside should be planning for around about 2,850 dwellings less than what's currently put forward in policy SP3,
That's
SP2.
correct.
Yeah. If I can turn again back to the council, please. I'm sort of mindful, obviously the council's from a position of, as it's pointed out to me, the planning practice guidance says to use the 2014 based household projections, obviously being invited by the forum and others. I'll bring other people in shortly to look at this alternatively in terms of latest census outputs and what that might mean for household projections within the context, I think going back to Dr. Bullock's point of looking at wider trends. I think what's been put to me is that since you're saying, since I think Mr. Hutchinson from your statement, since 1961, the trend in South Tyneside has been population decline. We could probably have a debate about whether that's still a valid kind of thing to be planning for. But my reading of the SHMA doesn't necessarily tally with that in terms of population is potentially projected to increase. I don't know if, Dr. Bullock, you can outline. I'm mindful of, we're looking at household projections on the one hand, and whether there are issues around looking at later census outputs that I need to be aware of in terms of consistency, and what potentially looking at some data in isolation might point to versus what potentially you could get from looking at a wider data set.
I have actually prepared a crib sheet here to help, because I thought this question may come up. It's a perfectly valid and reasonable question. In addition, the 2022 projections are now out as well. Now, bearing in mind we're talking about population, not households, so the base is talking about population. And I know it's not appropriate to introduce new information, but basically what I've done is summarise the population change 2023 to 2033 by the three different projections, the 2014 based, 18 based and the 22 based, and look at how they compare with the 2021 census. Now, one of the issues with the 21 census was a degree of underrepresentation and undercount, which has been reported in a number of areas because of COVID and what was going on at that moment in time. But what I have done is tried to summarise the point that in the 2021 census there was a reported population of 148,000. That compared with the 2014 projection at 2021 of 150,700, basically a 2% difference. For the 2018 projections, it was 152,000 population, which is a 2.7% variation from the 2021 census. And then for the 2022 projections that have just been published, there's a 0.6% difference from the census. They're talking about 148,500 population. So the point being that, yes, the census did report a lower figure, but there were questions around whether that fully reflected the total population. And the actual range that we're talking about in terms of differences that are being shown in the different projections would suggest to me that the position that has been taken about using the 2014 based projections, which informed the household projections, is still reasonable. And I'm happy to prepare that in a note if that would be helpful. But it's just to try and summarise the points around these degrees of differences between population projections.
Thank you. That's helpful. If I can bring in others, and I'll probably come back to a point on this, but invite Mr. Butler first, and then Councillor Herbert for the Green Party.
Thank you, sir. This became a key issue for communities and residents during the consultation period, when people realised that the need for the housing sites was being driven by the housing requirement figure, and that led people to try and understand how this came about. It's a very technical process, but the public did pick up on it, and I think that the 2014 based idea became consistently under attack as time went forward during the consultation on this plan, and I think it's fair to say eventually became discredited because in people's minds, because it was so much out of date in their view. Now, Mr. Bullock's just talked about total population. The important issue here is the issue of households, because that's driving the need. And in this situation, we find that the census showed, whether there was any undercounting or not, a significantly reduced number of households compared with any other projections that were being used. And therefore, that was the reasons that we thought that we should seek, the forum should seek advice as to whether there could be exceptional circumstances because of the nature of South Tyneside and its extreme constraints with a large amount of greenbelt within the borough. So from that point of view, we do believe that there is that case to be made, and we'd ask you to consider it seriously.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert, please.
You know, I would agree with the forum representation. I'm not sure where the census figures from Mr. Bullock come from, because when you look at it, the only thing I can see is a maximum of 3% increase in the population, projected up to 2032, which I would think you could extrapolate on. So looking at that as a percentage of the 72,000 houses in South Tyneside, 3% would give a target of 127 houses a year, similar to the ballpark figure that was being mentioned. In addition to the letter from Mr. Scott, there were several ministerial pronouncements about housing targets. Michael Jenrick, the Secretary of State for Housing in 2020, said that the standard method of assessing local housing need does not present a target in plan making, but instead provides a starting point, backing up the information in the letter. Michael Gove, then the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, in 9th of December 2023, said that it provides a clear protection for the Greenbelt in the MPF. It will facilitate flexibility for local authorities in relation to local housing need, clarifying a local lock on any changes to the Greenbelt boundaries. It says it's a starting point, not a target. So consistently throughout the government, you've got this information there. There's also guidance in the House of Commons Library published on the 27th of August 2021 called Calculating Housing Need in the Planning System, which states in 2.4, it's a starting point, not a target. Land constraints and the standard method are not starting points and not a target. The standard method is intended to be the starting point in determining how many homes a local planning authority can and should deliver, but it's not a target. Local planning authorities must take into account, for example, land constraints such as a greenbelt. So you've got in the House of Commons libraries guidance to ministers and the government backing up what's just been said about the flexibility, and I would think exceptional circumstances in an urban situation as we have Greenbelt's precious. Once it's gone, it's gone. We need to preserve it. And the figures on the housing projections, the population projections, ministerial pronouncements on how to interpret the NPPF give us the council leeway to adjust the housing target.
Thank you for that. Obviously, I'm mindful, sort of sitting here today, we're I think I said earlier, we're under the transitional arrangements of the September 2023 National Planning Policy Framework, so I'm sort of mindful that subsequent iterations of the NPPF were published. My examination for consistency with national policy is still bound back to that version of the NPPF and the associated chapters of the planning practice guidance. Just looking more widely, before I come back to the council, from the Neighbourhood Forum and others, I think you're also telling or inviting me to draw the conclusion as well that not only is this potential kind of overestimation of population, and then by association household projections an issue for South Tyneside, it could similarly apply to other authorities within the North East. So potentially a kind of a compounding of the kind of the over provision of housing across this region, I think, is how I've read some of the representations, or inviting me to kind of look at it more wide. There's potentially a wider issue. It's not just a South Tyneside matter when we come on to look at in due course around Greenbelt exceptional circumstances, whether other authorities can assist or help meet some of South Tyneside's needs. I think that's people are sort of generally nodding. Obviously, to pick up Mr. Butler's point, yes, my report will look carefully at this particular issue. But if I can just turn to the council, and obviously others can come in on this issue if they so wish. I mean, looking at the kind of the figures that Dr. Bullock provided in terms of overall population projections, trying to look at how this all then translates into household projections, and whether there are other factors at play in terms of, even if population and factoring in there could be potential issues with the 2021 census, does it necessarily follow that even if population is decreasing, or is it relatively stable, that then means fewer households, or are households getting smaller, or other factors that are potentially informing the household projections? And should I have an eye or a mind on, I mean, it's clearly presented in the SHMA, Ms. Cooper referred to it earlier in terms of the formula for the standard method, passed under delivery. I mean, when I look at the SHMA, I think there's a helpful figure within that document. I think I've got made notes, figure 2.4. I mean, house building seems to kind of peak around about 2016, 17, and then over the following 6 years, it's been significantly under the then housing target. Is that something I need to kind of bear in mind or have an eye on in terms of whether household formation is being potentially suppressed within South Tyneside? A number of things there. But,
yeah, I'll just pick up on the point of population increase, decrease, or stability not necessarily translating into households directly. I think it's table 2.15 of the SHMA looks at household types and changes over the plan period, and it identifies an increase in one-person households of over 54%. So I think that just demonstrates, households are becoming smaller, and therefore more of them per population.
I think it was a general point I was kind of raising, whether, if we look at population figures on the one hand that might be sort of pointing in terms of a particular trend, or I'm invited to kind of say, actually, the 148,000 for the 2021 census is a reasonable figure. Whether there's some sort of just general caution I should have in mind about looking at population projections as a way of informing kind of household projections and translating them, and whether there are other factors I need to kind of have in my mind when looking at the SMART and other evidence that points to population might be doing this, even if I were to accept the most recent census figure. But I need to have an eye on, or a mind to, actually, in terms of household formation and household projections, there are other factors that are potentially driving those figures and giving a kind of robustness or reliability to the standard method.
Yes, welcome to my world. Trying to discern all of this material. I think there's a I suppose a couple of points hopefully might help you out. I mean, first of all, we know from the so basically, as people broadly be aware, household projections are produced, they're then used to derive, so population projections are produced, then they are used to derive household projections. And what the Office for National Statistics does is it looks at the relationship between households and dwellings, works out the proportions of people likely to be household reference people, and on that basis do the projection of the households. Now, we've got data for 2014 and 2018, not for 2022 yet. But what is important to note is that under both the 14 and the 18 projections, the actual household growth, when we've looked at the period 2023 to 33 in the SMAR, the actual household growth is virtually identical. Annual change is 292 under the 2014 base projections and 294 under the 2018 base projections. So there's very little difference there. I think what I do, when I was working this data out, one thing I did want to note was that the actual base populations are different in the different projections. So the actual growth associated with those populations are different. Now, on that basis, what is interesting is that the 2014-based projections were showing a population increase of around 2,600 over that period, 23 to 33. The subsequent projections are talking of higher figures. The 2018 was talking about 3,800, the 2022 base talking about 3,500 more people over that period. But the proviso there is that the base populations are slightly different. So what we're saying is that the latest projections are showing an acceleration in population growth. The only issue that I would acknowledge is that they are predicated on slightly different base figures than the 2021 census. Although what I would say is the 2022 base projections are using the census as a key component of that analysis. So basically, in conclusion, what we're saying is that we are expecting the population to be going up across our time site over that period, and the resulting need, and then that will get translated to the household change. So we're expecting that to be pretty much consistent with what we've seen.
Thank you. And some people in the room might be sort of curious as to why we go so far back to the 2014 projections. We've got the 2018 projections. Why should we not use those? Notwithstanding, I appreciate we might be on the cusp of kind of 2022 projections, but nonetheless, just that 4-year period, why do you think the standard method is pretty clear to use the 2014 projections for the benefit of those who might think, well, why can't we use slightly more up-to-date projections for 2018? What were the issues around the 2018 household projections?
Okay, I mean, it's quite simply there's a policy position that we are, there is under the standard method. There's a requirement to use the 2014 based projections. And I think what I would do is go back to my original point that when we're looking at household and population projections, it's similar kinds of trends that we are seeing overall. The numbers may differ a little bit, but they do vary a bit. I think the other general point is government are very keen on accelerating house building in England, and that is consistent with the use of the 2014 base projections. When we compare those with later ones, they tended to be more bullish in terms of baseline populations and growth, and that is consistent with the government's ambition to be significantly increasing house building across England specifically. So there is a point there. I think the other point I would make, and it does come on to some of the wider discussion, that we're talking about using the standard method to establish baseline position. Within all of that, there is that acknowledgement that it's not just around the household change, it's also about economic change, it's about providing housing for economically active, for different groups of the population. So the point I'm making is that even if the 2014 projection is more bullish, it's helpful because what it does is it sets a broader canvas, if you like, from which the various needs that we need to be providing for can be increasingly be met.
Thank you for that. So if we can bring in others, I think just on this sort of general point of the kind of the starting point for looking at housing need and the application of the standard method and whether there are kind of exceptional circumstances to kind of take a different kind of starting point. I appreciate we're going to come on to probably after the mid-morning adjournment whether there are other adjustments that should be considered. But Mr. Martin, is there anything further you wish to add on what I've been hearing this morning?
Thank you, sir. It's really to build upon Dr. Bullock's point and more generally, the pitfall, I guess, of using and relying on demographics solely is if you have an area that has a declining population, all you end up doing is reinforcing that decline because you're using trends that have the downward trends, basically. That's why the government specifically say it's a starting point, because then you do need to sense check it. And I would bring it back to the fact that paragraph 16 of the NPPF is very clear that local planning authorities need to prepare positively for growth in their area. Paragraph 60 talks about the government authorities need to significantly boost the supply of new homes. And then, of course, you'll be aware there's a soundness test of a plan needing to be positively prepared. I would think if you're just purely going off demographics and you're purely going off demographics that are showing any sort of decline, you are just planning for decline, and it completely goes against and it's completely at odds with what the government's telling us we need to be doing. So, I mean, our representation is very clear, and I know we'll be going on to another point, but as a minimum, it's the standard method. That is the starting point, and you build from there. I don't think there's any exceptional circumstances to say you look at the standard method and you go backwards. I mean, the PPG is very clear about that. It has to be exceptional local circumstances, and in this case, I don't think there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Before bringing in others, I mean, obviously the other part of NPPF paragraph 61 is, I mean, the exceptional circumstances in terms of using an alternative approach have still got to reflect current and future demographic trends and market signals. So that's obviously something else to kind of bear in mind if looking at an alternative approach. Councillor Herbert, next, please.
Looking at sort of population trends and the housing market, reflecting that, the number of vacant properties in South Tyneside from the Regulation 18 to the Regulation 19 plans increased from 1.6% to 3% according to the figures. So that would say a slackening in the market, a lowering in demand. And half of those properties are long-term vacant over 6 months, which is nearly 1,000 properties. So I think that sort of gives you some indication what's going on with the housing market there. Talk about the national housing drive. Well, regionally, there's massive differences in demand, and obviously the south and south, London south east, massive demand there. In the north east, the population trends and the demand are totally different. And I think that the housing market should be addressing regional needs, not just national needs.
Thank you. Is it Mr. Morton next, please?
Thank you, sir. It's just a general point, really. I know we're dealing with detailed demographic issues, but as a general planning point on population, surely part of the problem in South Tyneside is there hasn't been a local plan in place for, well, core strategy 2007, allocations DPD 2012. The supply of housing is pretty much run dry. I'm sure we'll come on to housing delivery test and 5-year supply position, but the housing hasn't been built in this location, and that's going to have a knock-on effect on population.
Thank you. Bring in, I've forgotten the name from the gentleman from Mr. Banks. Oh, sorry, from Banks Properties.
Yeah, it's Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson, thank you.
Yeah, just reiterating there what's just been said, but also to provide an alternative view that, you know, if population is decreasing or only rising slowly, that should be a worrying trend, not just for South Tyneside, but the wider northeast. And to improve economic growth, you know, we need to actually build more houses to encourage people that are already living here to stay here, and also to attract wider people moving from elsewhere into the northeast, and more specifically South Tyneside. So it's just, yeah, just to make that point as well, that, you know, and also as said, the housing delivery has been poor in recent years, so that's obviously only going to contribute further to that problem.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, please.
Thank you, sir. In terms of the comments that would be planning for decline if we use purely demographic information, I don't think that's the position this plan would take us in. If we're looking at trying to provide suitable housing and the right housing in the right places for this plan, we do need to take into account societal trends such as the increase in single-person households, and this will have an impact on housing mix in particular as we move forward to consider other elements of the plan. The representations we've made about the need for greater housing for older people, for instance. So I'd hope you bear that in mind, that we can look at the population trends and use those positively to plan in the proper places.
Excuse me, mid-morning adjournment. I identified at point 7 of my agenda to kind of just bring some of this together. Whether exceptional circumstances do exist in South Tyneside. I focused in on the 2018 household projections as a kind of whether they would provide that that basis and what that figure would look like. I just want to check with the council that, again, I'll be looking at the SHMA, and would you point me to the kind of the principal run of all the kind of the variants of the 2008? If I'm looking at the excuse me, the 2018 household projections, it would be the sort of the. I appreciate there are various kind of runs on those projections. I think from what I've been hearing this morning, from what I've been reading, if I look at the principal run, the output is not that different to using the 2014 projections.
That's correct, yeah. And within the SHMA, you want to be looking at table 215, which is the principal projection, looking at change over time, which picks up what's just been discussed around household type and age. And then also table 216, which is looking at that change in households under the different scenarios published as part of the 2018 projections, then also comparing those with the principal projections from 2014 and 16, which were there at the time, and 18.
And at this moment in time, just so I'm absolutely clear on this point, Dr. Bullock, we have the 2021 census, but we do not yet have 2022 based projections.
We have the 22 based population, but we don't have the household yet.
Okay. And just finally, sort of picking up the point from Councillor Herbert and thinking around if there is an alternative, what does that potentially look like? I think the only sort of figures I'm really being presented with are really from the East Bolton Neighbourhood Forum, who've kind of suggested that if you use their methodology or approach, it'd be around about 2,850 homes less. I think it's the output. I think that's probably the modification you're suggesting I would need to bear in mind for the plan. There was a reference to kind of vacant homes or vacant homes, empty homes within the borough, how that potentially feeds through into kind of household projections. I appreciate there will always be a degree of churn within the housing market. Not all properties are occupied at any one time, but are there particular, can you recall from the Shamar evidence, Dr. Bullock, whether there are particular factors around vacancies, or because obviously you're coming up with a net kind of figure.
What you also have to bear in mind is there's a relationship between households and dwellings. There's usually more dwellings than households. When it comes to vacancy, if you're looking at more than 3% in an area, then it's probably worth looking a little bit more as to why, what are the underlying drivers for that. When I started research in the 90s, there was some broad benchmark of 2% of social and 4% of private were general benchmarks for what we call transactional vacants, i.e. allowing people to move around. I've kind of settled on a figure of around 3%, and as long as it's within that kind of 3% or below, then I'm generally satisfied that is part of the general market requirement to allow people to move around. That being said, there may be particular issues in very particular neighbourhoods around stock condition, stock quality, etc., which may be exacerbating vacancy, but that was not specifically covered in the evidence base because I was satisfied that overall the vacancy rates we're talking about were reasonable and proportionate.
Thank you. We're just coming up to 11 o'clock, so I'm going to take a mid-morning adjournment now. When we resume, we'll be back on point 8 of my agenda for this morning. Generally take around about 15 minutes for mid-morning adjournment, so we're just before 11 o'clock, so if people can be back in this room, please, for 11:15, and then we'll resume the discussion. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11:15, or just come up to 11:15, so I'm going to resume these examination hearings, please. Can I just check with people, is the temperature of the room okay? People comfortable? Not too hot, not too cold? Good. Okay, we're resuming discussion around housing need, and I'm on point 8 of my agenda. I think it's where I'm sort of looking at the other side of the coin now in terms of those submissions or representations on the plan, which suggests that the housing need and the housing requirement figure that the plan should be seeking to accommodate should be higher than the standard method output of 309 dwellings per annum. We're first going to look at kind of whether there are economic factors that would justify that and instigate a necessary change to the plan, and then secondly whether there are social factors in terms of looking at the amount of affordable housing to be planned for. In terms of the economic factors, I think I'm drawn to, I think it was then part of the PPG, Planning Practice Guidance, paragraph 2A10, in terms of when might it be appropriate to plan for a higher housing need figure than the standard method indicates. And there was reference to various factors, including growth strategies for the area that are likely to be deliverable, and things like strategic improvements that are likely to drive an increase in the need for homes locally. In terms of planning for a higher housing figure to support, we'll start with local and regional economic growth. Various representations point me to the council's own sort of local economic growth strategies and the strategies of the then North East local enterprise partnership in terms of the number of jobs to be planned for, or whether from the council's perspective, and whether how this was looked at, including as part of the SHMA, whether the council has looked at this but ultimately concluded that there are not the kind of the factors here that would warrant or justify a higher housing need figure than the standard method indicates. Is it Ms. Cooper first?
Yeah, so I think we set most of that out in our hearing statement. I think we sort of set out each of the parts of the PPG, and the SHMA does look at a range of alternative demographic scenarios, but ultimately concludes that there are no exceptional circumstances for an uplift to the housing number.
Thank you. And in terms of I think some of the representations that are before me sort of question whether the SHMA, so the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, did look at this in kind of sufficient detail, given there are very clear kind of economic ambitions to deliver additional jobs within South Tyneside and this part of the world, whether there's going to be sufficient housing to kind of meet those kind of economic expectations that are still going to result, hopefully, in some kind of sustainable patterns of growth. I don't know, again, if the council wishes to kind of respond to those, I think you do pick it up as part of your reply to, or statement as part of my MIQ 2.6, just in kind of general terms.
Yeah, so obviously the plan does sort of seek to meet the economic ambitions of the council and the wider regional area. We do that through allocating enough economic land to meet that need. But as we sort of set out in our hearing statement, that land is for the most part within existing economic areas, with the exception of Wardley Colliery, which is a modest allocation, so it's unlikely to have a discernible impact on the local housing need. And then I think we touched yesterday on the IAMP. The IAMP topic paper looks at the impact of, well, potential impact of IAMP on housing. And again, it kind of comes to the conclusion that there won't be a particularly notable impact on housing need in South Tyneside.
Thank you. I mean, probably for the benefit of people in the room, I've kind of done things slightly back to front in that I picked up the employment kind of side of SP3 yesterday, and then we looked at the kind of the council's approach in terms of its policy on labour demand scenario in terms of responding to, as Ms Cooper's referred to, things like the IAMP that drives the highest or informs the highest employment land figures compared to the alternative scenario, which is the labour supply. What would be the number of jobs, employment land you would need to provide employment for the anticipated kind of household growth. But I just wonder if I can, at this point, invite in or bring in those who make sort of the general submissions that basically the plan is not going to provide enough homes to meet kind of economic ambitions. I'm not going to pick on anybody in specific, but I see Ms Harding for the Home Builders Federation has made reps on this point. I know Litchfield's on behalf of Avent Homes. Again, I think Mr Martin on behalf of various clients has also made similar submissions. But I'll bring in Ms Harding first for the Home Builders Federation, and then we'll hear from others.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to highlight as well as the PPG, the MPPF also sets out that planning policies should seek to address potential barriers to investment, and included in those barriers are housing. So we just wanted to make sure that housing is not a barrier. We were one of the people who suggested that perhaps the SHMA had taken rather a light touch in terms of its assessment in relation to what is required in the PPG in terms of looking at growth strategies and strategic infrastructure improvements. They have highlighted the main document, so they have highlighted where the evidence is in terms of the potential employment growth, the number of jobs that the council are looking to have, their aspirations for 25,000 new jobs for South Tyneside by 2031. We obviously also have the IAMP that's currently at Reg 19 in terms of where it's happening with its own area action plan, the second area action plan, and how that's going to develop. And whilst I note that the council have suggested that 90% of the potential workers are in the North East, that does still leave another 10%, and also that the North East is quite a very large area, very general impact in terms of where people would be coming from. Obviously, in terms of sustainability and the location of the IAMP, it would make sense for those people to be within the area of the IAMP in terms of being in South Tyneside or within Sunderland. So it would make sense that there is going to be the potential for people commuting if they are travelling from further afield. I would be suggesting that the council should be looking to ensure that they do have the housing that comes alongside that strategic employment site to make sure that there is not unsustainable commuting patterns, to make sure that those people are local to the area and can work there. So I would be suggesting that at the moment there is a lot of evidence to suggest that there are growth strategies in place. There is the potential for housing to be a barrier to investment and employment in the area, and that I don't have the evidence in front of me to suggest that the council's current housing figure is sufficient to meet those additional needs that are there from the employment base.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to kind of come in on this first point around economic development or supporting economic development? Mr Westwick first.
It's just an incredibly brief point. HBF have covered everything very well. It was just that the housing figure is the bare minimum. IAMP is a once-in-a-generational employment zone, and essentially that development should be taken into account in the housing figures. Just to reiterate, that 309 figure is the bare minimum. It doesn't, I can't say in the evidence it's taken into account any growth of the IAMP scheme.
Thank you. And then Mr Martin next, please.
Thank you, sir. It's really to build on what Mr Westwick just said there. The 309 figure is a demographically derived figure. It does make no real adjustment for any sort of uplifting growth strategy over and above a baseline. It's clear from looking at the local plan itself that they are aiming, as they should be, for economic growth above a baseline. And I don't think the SHMA particularly deals with it in a very convincing way. I'd point you to paragraph 4.26 of the SHMA, which I think says something that it considers that a minimum local housing target of 309 homes per year reflects an aspiration for achieving economic growth. But then it goes on and says, South Tyneside is part of a wider functional area extending across Tyne and Wear as evidenced in commuting and travel to work patterns. It's therefore reasonable to assume that new jobs created in South Tyneside could be done by people within a wider functional economic area. To me, that is, again, completely contrary to what the NPPF says, which is trying to create sustainable patterns of development and trying to have people live where the jobs are, rather than encouraging more in commuting to the area. I'd also probably want to draw your attention to the fact that the employment land figure is derived from a policy on response, and a 309 dwellings per annum is not a policy on figure. Therefore, there is a fundamental mismatch between economic growth aspirations and aspirations for housing growth. So to my mind, it's more than just the IAMP, it's the wider economic growth strategy. You can't really, in some respects, have your cake and eat it. If you have your economic growth for sustainable development, you need the housing growth to go with it. And at the moment, from the evidence, I'm not convinced that's the case.
Thank you for that. Is it Fulcher?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I would just concur with everything that's been said. It's wholly unsustainable to rely on in commuting from other areas. And I just wanted to flag the point that in relation to IAM, for it to be as successful as we need it to be for the region, people will want to live in Sunderland and South Tyneside, and South Tyneside have clearly recognised this previously by reaching out to Sunderland to discuss shared expansion and being able to facilitate land for that, in which Sunderland weren't able to provide. So it's been considered previously, but hasn't really been reflected within the new local plan.
Thank you. Before I bring in others who may have a different view on things, I mean, from a recollection of representations, and I'm probably not surprised for this, I don't think anybody's kind of putting forward to me an alternative or a higher specific figure. I think you're sowing the seed that, you know, this is something that needs to be looked at further, and it would be for the council to kind of come to that conclusion to look at. I don't think anybody's articulating, well, the housing need figure needs to be X or Y. Just on the point of kind of having in mind kind of sustainable patterns where people are living, where people are working. Obviously, the council's pointed me to I think it's document How 14. I think it's the Arup paper. It's 2016, so I'm mindful it's of some vintage. Obviously, the IAMP is cross-boundary with Sunderland. Is there any kind of, I think sort of, from my mind and thought processes, drawing conclusions around reasonably kind of tight geographies here? South Tyneside's a relatively small borough, Sunderland's relatively close, Gateshead's relatively close. Should I be overly concerned about what might be happening in terms of sustainable development, sustainable kind of commuting travel patterns? Is a reasonable degree of fluidity across what is ultimately a kind of a relatively small kind of geography? Mr. Martin.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I think you should be, because being a planner who not only looks at local plans but was also at the coalface with development management, what comes up time and time again now is active travel, and being able to have people within employment and services within cycling and walking distances particularly. And when planning applications go in, that councils often want us to look at that in the first instance. having in commuting from adjacent areas is not really compatible with that?
Thank you. If I can bring in others on this issue about whether there should be sort of further housing to support economic growth, in particular, Mr. Hutchinson for the forum.
Thank you, sir. Just a comment on what's been previously said. Although the council, excuse me, may have an active travel policy, I think it's a well-known fact that people still do commute, sometimes significant distances for employment. So that might be a point, but I don't think it's a significant point. Just a couple of other points. The IAMP has already taken up large areas of arable and greenbelt land, not necessarily all within the borough of South Tyneside, but within the greenbelt, which in the northeast generally is being significantly reduced. The other point I would like to make is that the unemployment situation in South Tyneside in December 2024 was 5.7% against a national average of 3.8%. So there's a significant more number of people that are unemployed who potentially could have jobs within the IAMP. So again, I think that that sort of counters the argument for further homes to be bought because they already live within the borough. We would also agree with the council's assertion that 90% of current IAMP workers are anticipated to live within the northeast and within commuting distance. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Herbert next, please.
We've already heard from Ms Cooper that the IAMP won't have a significant effect on housing in South Tyneside. Its location, which will be on the Follinsbury extension of the metro, will open up that employment opportunity to the wider area, to the wider region. So the workers will be drawn from a wider area, not just from South Tyneside. South Tyneside, there's about 50% of the working population move out of South Tyneside on a daily basis to work. If you provide employment opportunities in South Tyneside, you will prevent that need to commute, and you will then be able to promote the active travel and use of public transport, which would be a more sustainable way to do things.
Thank you. If I can come back to the council, please, and I think that the points that were put to me both in representations and what I've just heard, I think the description that the strategic housing market assessment has kind of given this, I think, quote, a light touch, that it's not looked sufficiently at whether there should be an uplift for economic purposes. I don't know if the council or Mr Bullock want to respond to the charge presented.
Happily, and I think the SHMA does give a narrative around acknowledging that the 309 is a reasonable representation. I think one of the really important points around this debate is very often we'll look at as a way you're familiar with looking at different rates of economic activity, migration, etc. One of the key points that through the work we've done on IAMP as well as in South Tyneside is the whole sense of upskilling the existing population to fill the jobs that are being created. So in my mind there is a pool of talent within South Tyneside already which can be used to try and support the jobs and the economic growth ambitions of the local authority. I think that's a really important point.
Does that speak to the point that's made to me, I think it was also raised yesterday at the employment session, around the level of unemployment within South Tyneside? And ask Dr Bullock first.
Yep, certainly. I mean, economic activity rates, unemployment rates, etc., are pointing to. I mean, I don't have the data immediate to hand, but living within the locality, I'm fully aware of some of the economic challenges of populations.
Thank you for bringing Ms Harding again for the HBF on this point.
Yeah, I just want to say, while I don't disagree with the aspiration for upskilling the population, that's a very worthy cause. I would be querying what the council are doing to upskill that workforce to ensure that they are actually going to be able to take employment in the IAMP or other employment that is available as they go for growth. Without evidence, to say in the SHMA that there is some form of funding or courses or support from the council to make that happen, I would be very begrudging to take that as a potential way to meet those employment needs.
Thank you. I mean, the council obviously has pointed me, as I mentioned, to the ARUP paper. I mean, I appreciate, as I said, that's now some time ago. But just picking up the point from the Home Builders Federation, I don't know if it's something the council can go away and come back to me on in terms of what there is in terms of strategies or programs at the moment that's kind of going to kind of assist local people to fulfil the employment being created at the IAMP.
Yeah, we can look into that. But if I could just reiterate what's already been put in our answer to MIQs on this, that study did indicate that the vast majority of those who will be employed in IAMP prospectively, about 90%, do come from the northeast. Also take into account the fact that there is significant out-commuting from South Tyneside as well. So there are a number of dynamics to take into account. And underlying all of that, in terms of looking at the soundness of this plan, in terms of housing provision and meeting housing needs generated by employment opportunities as they arise, it's important to bear in mind that this council is of the view, formed the view on the evidence, that the requirements caused by IAMP are pretty modest overall in terms of its impact on the housing market and housing numbers. It would be, in a way, putting a finger in the air to say, well, if we are to advance a figure which is higher than the standard method, what should that figure be? Because we'll be looking at having to justify that probably in green belt terms as well, in exceptional circumstances. And at the moment, we are, as an authority, not able to identify a figure that needs to be higher than a standard method in order to make the plan sound. We consider the plan is sound as it's currently based.
I think it's part of the point, Mr. Shadoravian, that people might say around the table the council doesn't have that figure because it hasn't kind of investigated or considered that or kind of dug a bit deeper to kind of see what that could potentially mean.
The evidence base is what it is, and we can address that point specifically if there's a need to in due course.
Thank you. Mr. Martin and then Mr. Westwick, please.
Thank you, sir. Again, I would just re-emphasise as well, it's not just about the IAMP, it's a wider growth initiative, and it's the indirect and induced economic effects of the IAMP on the wider area as well that needs to be taken into account. I think we're doing ourselves a little bit of a disservice if we over-focus on the IAMP and ignore the wider economic goals. And to go on to the point about you having any sort of uplift on the 309 figure, there are numerous plans where that's been done. There's numerous methodologies that you can look at that would let you arrive at a sensible figure. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm always mindful I'm examining the plan in front of me, and you could be drawn to other comparisons, but I've got to look at the evidence before me, and I will go back to look at what's been derived from the scenario, which is the labour supply in terms of the amount of employment jobs needed to support the planned housing growth versus, as you say, Mr. Martin, the kind of policy on scenario that the plan adopts and the kind of degree of difference between the two. I'm just thinking, I mean, I've kind of, to some extent, I'm just looking at this plan, obviously, but just casting my mind to what's happened if any local plans more recently have been adopted or found sound within this part of the world, where, I don't know, you say many plans have an uplift applied to them.
Yeah, quite a few up here. I mean, Darlington's one that springs to mind immediately.
Okay, Mr. Westwick, please.
So again, it's a brief point. It's just I'm slightly struggling on the evidence base. My reading of the ARROT report was actually that then on page 12 requests the council, Sunderland, South Tyneside, to look at objectively assess needs in a bit more detail, as in dig deeper, as you said, sir. And then the SHMA essentially then reverts back to the ARROT report. So it all feels a bit circular, and the evidence doesn't seem to be there to assess the impact of IAM in any great depth. It might be something the council can pick up in their note.
Thank you. I think on the IAMP are currently being made or anticipated to be made in terms of securing employment for local people, potentially what that could mean. As I've indicated, obviously the ARROT report paper is now nearly 9 years old. Whether again that's something the council not necessarily update. I'm just thinking it's probably something I probably will need to think about a bit more. One of the things I am curious about, I mean, as I'm going to draw my own conclusions, but just thinking about plan making more recently, from my recollection, Sunderland is the most recent update, most recent adopted local plan in this part of the world. No,
probably Darlington, sir.
Okay, is Darlington in the same functional economic market area, or can be? Are there specific factors in Darlington that I may need to bear in mind? I don't know, Treasury related or anything else that.
Yes, sir. They factored in Treasury and also the effects of Teesworks on their numbers. Okay. Essentially, exactly the same concept as I am.
Okay. As I say, I want to draw my own conclusions, but I mean, Sunderland struck me as the more recent or most local recent kind of plan examination. Whether the inspector there was presented with the same issues around the IAMP and uplift to housing need. But I will reflect, Mr. Westwick, on what, as you say, the circularity point of the ARROT paper, as I say, bearing in mind its age and how far the SHMA has either picked that up or not picked it up, and we're sort of not necessarily caught in a circle, but whether there's a case of kind of reinforcement that's I need to be concerned about.
Let's assume you are concerned about it. What should follow after that? It might mean that you want an update to the ARUP report or a review to see if there's been any change of circumstances whereby its conclusions might have altered, and what the implications of that might be for formers. Is that something which we could do? Well, I'm getting some nods.
So I appreciate that offer. I'm going to reflect on it. I'm not here right now going to say, no. I want you to do that, but I taking a positive signal that were I to arrive at that conclusion, that's something that the council could feasibly do. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's only if you think it's necessary. At the moment, we're content to rely upon the evidence as it is. And there's also another point to consider, which is we're dealing here with issues of soundness. And if you're of the view that the evidence base is insufficient upon which to base a conclusion that the plan is sound, then that's all well and good. If it's a different question, which is an aspirational one, which is, should we be planning for more housing in order to cater for economic growth or encourage greater economic growth and a local land supply relative to that growth? That's aspirational rather than soundness based. Because there's no evidence before the examination to suggest that a shortfall, a posited shortfall in housing, is going to in some way compromise the economic objectives of the borough as ensconced in the emerging plan. So it comes down to choices, and the availability of choices and the amount of growth those choices predicate do not necessarily correlate with issues of soundness. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you. Okay, I'll reflect on what has been said and the potential for further work in relation to the ARUP paper. I've kind of, through the agenda, taken sort of items 8 and 9 together. I take the point from Mr. Martin that there's kind of wider economic issues here rather than just to focus solely on the IAMP. But before I move on to affordable housing, is there anything further anybody wishes to say in relation to an uplift to support economic growth ambitions? Ms. Harding?
Only if you wanted to know what the Sunderland Inspector's report says. I could direct you to paragraph 52.
I don't think it's a document that's in front of the examination at this stage.
In which case I'm happy to leave it with you to look in your own time.
Okay. I really shouldn't be looking at things that are not in front of the examination. It is a relative, I think if memory serves, it's a relatively recent kind of plan examination in this part of the world against an earlier draft of the MPP. Is it something that I would, if I requested to be put into exam?
To be perfectly frank with you, it's a public document. It's a public decision, and some might say it would be rather perverse for you not to consider what the conclusions were, bearing in mind the interrelationship between the two authorities and the economic markets. So there's no way we would discourage you from looking at that. And if you have any questions which arise from your consideration of that document, then in my respectful view, they should be communicated to us.
Thank you.
to the examination, not just to us.
Yes, indeed. With that in mind, then, I appreciate, as you say, it's Mr. Shadowraven, it's a public document. Just to make sure I'm looking at the right version and anybody else is looking at the right version, can I request that the council adds it to the examination library as one of the post
We will do that.
submission documents? Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on then in terms of any other potential adjustments, and again taking the standard method figure as a starting point. My question to the examination was whether it'd be necessary for soundness to plan for a higher level of housing need to help meet affordable housing needs within South Tyneside. I don't think the strategic housing market assessment for South Tyneside is different to many others across the country in terms of identifying a higher need for affordable housing than the overall housing need figure. I think I quoted the figure there of 361 affordable dwellings, and without inviting the council in the first instance, say whether it's considered through the SHMA or other processes to adjust the overall housing figure to deliver more affordable housing within the borough.
Yeah, again, I think we've set out our position in the hearing statement that the PPG states that the total affordable housing need can be considered in the context of its likely delivery as a proportion of mixed market and affordable housing developments. So the local plan sets affordable housing requirements based on a combination of the identified need and viability. So we kind of looked at that 361 affordable dwellings per annum in the context of what would that mean if we were to aim to deliver that. And we would need to deliver over 1,500 dwellings per annum. And I think, yeah, the council came to the conclusion that is not a deliverable strategy. That would be based on an average 20% affordable housing requirement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. For those, I think there are various people around the table. I think do take the view that the housing figure should be increased as a response to the affordable housing situation. Again, I don't think anybody's kind of putting forward to the examination a specific figure that should be, or a specific adjustment, but again, the general principle that the 309 as a starting point should be adjusted upwards given the particular circumstances in South Tyneside. We'll bring in Mr. Ayrton first and then Miss Harding.
Yeah, we're just on that point, sir. I don't think anybody from the statements I've seen in the submissions are saying that the council should deliver the entire need for the local plan period. I think the comments are more should be done to deliver more, not the entire amount in that period.
So in your view, Mr. Ayrton, is it kind of looking at increments up from 309 and seeing what that could mean for affordable housing delivery?
Yeah, I think I think as a starting point, I think the SHMA identifies a considerable need. The use of the figure 361 is being identified, which exceeds the standard method for housing requirement. Past delivery has been really low in South Tyneside in terms of affordable housing, so there's a chronic need there, which is significant. The SHMA, one of the main justifications of the SHMA for not looking for an uplift in the housing need is that they identify that the council has taken positive steps towards increasing the affordable housing offer in the borough, such as delivering affordable homes through South Tyneside Homes, which seems to be the solution, but I've not seen much evidence of the strategy for delivering that, how much that's going to contribute to that need as well. And there's no other method other than the sites that have been allocated that are going to make a positive contribution to that. We had a look at the sites that have been allocated in the local plan, looked at the indicative capacity of those in the local plan, and the affordable housing requirement, where it's 10%, 25% and 30%. And we worked out, this in the submitted statement, that would deliver a total of 678 affordable dwellings over the plan period. That's on the assumption that the full densities are met and the indicative capacities are met. So that's the equivalent of the affordable housing need that would be generated over a 20-month period, would be met at best for the local plan. So we feel that supports the position that the affordable housing need justifies an increase in the housing need of the local plan period.
Presumably also need to bear in mind, Mr. Ayrton, that obviously the local plan allocations are a proportion of meeting the housing requirements. Obviously an existing pipeline of consented supply. Presumably some of that will also be delivering some affordable housing. There may be other windfall sites that come forward.
Perhaps I'm not certain of how much that would be.
Okay, thank you. I think I said I'd next hear from Ms Harding, and then I'll cross over to Mr Martin, please.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with the points just raised. Even allowing for the fact that some of those people in the affordable need will have been accounted in the population and household projections, even accounting for the fact that some of the homes might be met through registered landlords providing entirely affordable homes. If we know that the affordable housing need is 361 dwellings per annum and we're only delivering 309, even with the best will in the world, we're never addressing that affordable housing need, which is just increasing those people on the waiting list, increasing the numbers of people who need a home. Even if we go a small way towards increasing the housing figure and increasing those people, it is doing something to address it. Not even building enough homes to meet that affordable need is clearly a significant issue. It's a significant need that isn't being addressed by the council in their current approach. And I can't see a way that they are going to get around that. They're just allowing this to happen and allowing the issue to get worse. And as we've said, even if you assume every allocation meets it, you're looking at 20 months. Even if you allow for the fact that some windfall sites might meet it, or some of the current sites under construction or with extant permission meet it, you may be looking at, what, 3 years at the most? I mean, it's getting nowhere near where the council need to be. And in this case, this isn't just homes, this is people who need somewhere to live and who need those affordable homes and are just sat on a waiting list at the moment. I really do think the council should be doing more to address this issue.
Thank you. And in terms of doing the more, and we'll look at kind of viability, probably as part of the stage 2 kind of hearing sessions in more detail. I mean, looking at some of the figures and sort of percentages across parts of the plan area, I mean, Ms Harding, it seems to me it's going to take significantly more housing to kind of have one would argue, potentially a material difference to what's, in terms of an alternative kind of strategy or approach. It's going to require potentially a lot more housing.
I wouldn't disagree with it needing a lot more housing per se. I just think doing something realistic to get to meeting that figure is better than nothing, and at the moment I think we're doing less than nothing realistically in terms of 309 in terms of the housing requirement versus 361. That's not even planning to even get close to the need in the first instance, even if every house was built by a registered provider. So I think, you know, an increase is an improvement. A significant increase would be a bigger improvement. And obviously, as I say, registered providers will provide some of those sites. If there is more sites, there's better opportunities for them, same as there is for anybody else building market housing.
Thank you. So just stick with the Home Builders Federation, but I'll invite others in on the point. I mean, part of the rationale and the methodology around the standard method is obviously the affordability ratio to kind of respond to kind of what market signals are telling us. I take it it's a wider point, but does that go some way to addressing the overall affordability picture within the borough?
I would say not in this case, because we are talking about people who can't afford a home, so they are automatically people who are looking at the affordable housing provision. They aren't looking to purchase a market home in terms of that affordability.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, next please.
Thank you, sir. Really, just to pick up on those points, it's clear when you look at the evidence, the SHMAR, that there is significant requirement for affordable homes, and that's a backlog and a newly arising driven need. If nothing is done, then all that will do is just drive up that backlog even further. I can't see in any credible way that having no adjustment for affordable housing, given the extent of affordable homes that are needed, can be justified. It's almost sort of burying your head in the sand in terms of those affordable homes and those people who are in affordable need. To me, it would make sense that an uplift could be provided to assist in that. It's not going to completely magically sort of cure that issue, because, as the council have said, to do that is probably not feasible. But to do nothing when the evidence is pointing that there is a substantial amount of people who are in housing need in this area just is not justified in my opinion. And it's borne out as well by the delivery of affordable homes in the borough. So, I mean, if you look at the annual monitoring report, I think that showed last year 48 affordable homes were completed in the borough, and that's coming back to a trend that that was post-COVID, sort of 2019, but it's barely touching the sides in terms of what's required. What I think we need to avoid is having a plan that's then adopted that does nothing and it actually exacerbates the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to hear next from Mr. Ayrton, and then I will come to Ms. Hutchison and Mr. Butler.
Thank you, Stuart. Just picking up on a question you raised to Ms. Harding earlier about what more can the local plan do. I don't think it's just a case of allocating more sites. That's one of the things. But it's also the type of sites, the sites that can deliver more affordable housing. So of those sites that have been allocated, I think 40% that will be delivered on are on just 6 allocations in the urban and village growth area. There's more confidence that they can deliver greater amounts of affordable housing. So it's not just about more sites, it's the type of sites that can help meet that need too.
Thank you. Mr. Hutchison next, please.
Thank you, sir. We would agree that there's certainly a need for more affordable housing across the borough generally, and an issue that hasn't been mentioned so far is the fact that when some new developments are approved, some developers talk about problems with viability as an argument against constructing affordable homes. So I think that's worth mentioning. But the main point that we'd like to raise is that in the Regulation 19 plan, certainly for the sites in East Bolton, the council reduced the percentage of affordable housing from 30% to 25%. Now, I don't know off the top of my head what the figures were for other sites within the borough, but rather than increase the overall number of housing required, simply increasing the percentage back to 30% across all of the development sites within the borough would go some way to addressing that figure of 361. Yeah, and just to add to that, you'll be aware that the government's recently announced additional funding for the provision of affordable housing, which may facilitate the creation of more affordable housing across the country and in South Tyneside.
Thank you. Mr. Butler, please.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to see the conversion of the home builders to provision of affordable homes. Certainly our experience with the major site that we have is that they do everything to avoid the provision of affordable homes within their schemes. They're able to look at issues such as discounting the requirements. It's then difficult to get Section 106 agreements to provide the homes coming forward. So our approach is one that within the overall housing requirement and looking at Policy 18, which you're going to consider in the second half, we want to see that positively applied policy to provide affordable homes within the plan on the appropriate sites that would need them. In terms of the council not doing very much in terms of affordable homes, Mr. Hutchins just said, we're moving to a period now where a government is going to give resources to local authorities and to registered providers. We'll have a different era. We also have the North East Combined Authority and a mayor who has powers to provide finances towards providing affordable homes as well. So we will see the ability of public organisations in partnership with private house builders where necessary have a greater ability moving forward, and we think that can be done within the context of the current housing requirement, notwithstanding our arguments given to you this morning about whether that figure is still too high. So that would be the approach we'd like you to look at, please.
Thank you for that. So I'm clear on the kind of respective positions. If I can come back to the council, I think Ms. Mr. Hutchinson, is that a legacy? Yeah, okay. Ms. Cooper, please.
Yeah, just to come back to the sort of current affordable housing delivery. Obviously, we're looking at the council delivering affordable housing at the minute in the context of an out-of-date plan and the council being under the presumption of sustainable development. Obviously, the council are confident that we've got robust affordable housing policies in the plan, and if we can bring those forward, then that would obviously increase affordable housing delivery above and beyond what we're delivering currently. And just to go back to the point about the affordability uplift in the standard method, and I take Ms Hardin's point that obviously the affordable housing need is different from the affordability of market housing, but if we improve affordability, generally that may bring down the affordable housing need overall.
And just to kind of provide another potential kind of part of the picture, I think it's been put to me that there isn't particularly kind of active kind of other ways of delivering affordable housing. I don't know if the council has a view on that, whether the council itself, I know some authorities are now increasingly looking at delivering housing themselves, or whether some of the sites that are coming forward are being delivered exclusively by registered providers within the borough.
Yeah, some of the sites that we've allocated through the plan have been kind of in conjunction with our strategic housing team, and we would envisage that they would be mostly or wholly affordable housing. And yeah, like I say, we've worked closely with the strategic housing team on developing the policies in the plan and allocating council-owned sites in the plan.
Is there anywhere I can sort of draw on to what those sites, where those sites are, how I could kind of identify those sites? And I appreciate the point you're making, Ms. Cooper, that I probably shouldn't assume that they're going to be wholly affordable, but in terms of the kind of council-owned sites, are they identifiable, so I can have a feel for the type and number of sites?
I'm not sure they are in the plan, but it is something we can quite easily pull together.
Is that something I can request as an action point for the council, to kind of just put that list together for me of council-owned sites where there might be more scope for provision? Thank you. Before I move on, I think people are sort of leaving very much the ball in my court to kind of think about whether there should be an uplift for affordable housing. Probably were I minded to go that way, then it would be something for the council to kind of pick up that ball. But before I get too carried away with those kind of thoughts, Dr. Bullock, you think you want to come in on this point?
I think just a final point, possibly should have been a first point. It's important to understand that when we run affordable housing needs analysis, we assume certain parameters. So for South Tyneside, we assumed that people shouldn't pay more than 25% of their income on rent, or 3.5 times if they were buying. It also assumes certain levels of, for newly forming households, similar kind of parameters. If those parameters were shifted, that number would change. You know, if you were going to say 20% income, the figures would go up. If it was to say 30%, it would come down. So I think the point is that what we're doing in the SHMA is establishing what the measure of affordable housing need is under a range of parameters as specified in planning practice guidance. One of the biggest issues with that approach is it doesn't sufficiently take into account the role of the private rented sector. And within South Tyneside, there's about 30% of households that are in the private rented sector that are dependent on housing benefit. So in other words, if you are in affordable need, there are other options other than just affordable housing. There are other options in the private rented sector. So I just wanted to try and give that a little bit more context, to not be overly fixed on that particular number of 361, but understand a little bit more around the context of it. The bottom line for me, whenever I'm doing this kind of work, is to understand what's the magnitude, what's the measure of affordable housing, recognising that only a proportion of that is likely to be delivered, and the actual figure itself can be can be affected by the assumptions made in the model. It just so happened that I used the consistent model that we did in the previous study, which showed a need for 222. The main 220, sorry. The main reason for needs changing with the uplift in prices that have been experienced since then.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on from affordability, please, and then, oh, sorry, Councillor Herbert. Yep.
These people must be that have demand for affordable housing must be living somewhere. It's largely probably in the private rented sector. So if they have access to affordable housing, they'll move out of the private rented sector. Now, demand for private rented sector will go down. The rent that they can charge will go down. These people are able to sell their houses. So the housing stock will increase available to people. So that may be something to factor in as well, isn't it?
Thank you. I think obviously I'm going to look at to Dr. Bullock in terms of where affordable housing is coming from, and presumably needs are arising from people within existing housing, whether that's an independent household or a concealed household, i.e. still living at home, or in circumstances where you don't ideally want to be and you're looking for something alternative. It's not just a case of kind of potential sort of flux or churn within the housing market.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, not to labour it too much, but it is a complex. There's a lot of reasons why people are in need of affordable housing, and I think the point is that people can go into housing that is affordable to them in a number of ways. If they can afford the market, fine. If they can go into the private rented sector, then housing benefit and universal credit can help support them in that particular place. Or there is the actual affordable housing option that's provided by a range of providers. But there are complexities with all of those. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to move on, please, to point 11 on my agenda, and whether there should be kind of any further adjustments for any unmet housing needs that South Tyneside should agree to accommodate. We kind of touched upon this through the duty to cooperate session yesterday. I'm not aware that any authority is yet formally asking South Tyneside to assist in meeting their housing needs.
Yeah, that's correct. So all of South Tyneside's neighbouring authorities have got adopted core strategies or local plans which were found to be sound through their examination processes. I know some of the authorities will now be looking at updated plans or plan reviews, but at this point in time, none of them have approached us with a request for assistance.
And those raft of kind of various adopted plans were meeting the then identified housing need in full, so there wasn't a kind of a...
Yeah, so yeah, we've never at any point been approached for assistance meeting housing need.
Okay. Yes, sorry, Councillor Herbert, yeah.
Just make the point that all the neighbouring authorities are building way above their ONS projected housing needs. Sunderland by 10,000, Gateshead by 6,000, North Tyneside by 2,000. So it's hardly surprising that they don't have to ask South Tyneside for any accommodation on housing need.
Thank you. I think that goes back to, I think, one of the points you had earlier this morning in terms of how the various housing needs have been calculated. And I appreciate, the Green Party and others have a view on it's an alternative to the standard method approach. I've got nothing further, unless anybody else wishes to say anything further on potential unmet needs from neighbouring authorities. In which case, the final sort of question for this session on housing need is whether the plan making in South Tyneside has been sort of soundly based from the starting point that the housing requirement should be the same as the standard method local housing need figure of 309 homes a year. I appreciate the Council's answered this in response to MIQ 2.9. I don't think there's anything further, Ms Cooper, you wish to add to what's already in the statement?
No, I don't think there is anything further to add above and beyond our hearing statement.
And can I just ask from the Council's perspective, and we kind of touched upon this briefly yesterday in relation to housing need from a sustainability appraisal point of view, and looking at kind of reasonable alternatives, whether there were kind of alternative approaches or figures to that, or the content that's put in policy SP3 in terms of meeting that minimum housing requirement of just over 5,000 houses?
Yes, early on in the plan making process there was an appraisal of a high, medium or low growth option, but in more recent years, in the later stages of plan making, the Council's position, as we've heard, has been that the standard method is the reasonable option, and so that's what's been reflected in the sustainability appraisal.
Thank you. Are there any further submissions people wish to make in relation to just kind of pulling this all together and setting the housing requirements within the plan at reflective of 309 homes over 17 years? Mr. Hutchinson, please.
Thank you. Yeah, to start with, I would just reiterate the point that we made earlier about policy SP2 not being sound, as there's a clear case for using a much lower housing requirement figure based on the 2021 census, local circumstances and green belt constraint. We would also argue that policy SP 16.2 is not sound, as it simply uses the number of new homes that is the indicative figure for site GA2, which is the land at North Farm in East Bolden. The policy doesn't acknowledge the additional 202 houses proposed for the site at Clean Lane. Now, this was included as an allocation in the Regulation 18 plan, and although it was rejected by the Council's Planning Committee in March, an appeal has just been lodged by the developer, and if this is successful, the Forum feels that the contribution of the site should be added to those 202 houses, should be added to the plan's housing numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Westwick, next, please.
So just to clarify and comment on that point, I act on behalf of Vant Homes and an appeal by Vant Homes. It is a brownfield site, sustainable location, but was rejected by the council and refused. So we are at appeal at the moment. So there's no certainty over that site at the moment in time.
Thank you. I think as when we get to kind of stage 2 of the hearings process, we're going to look in a bit more, well, a lot more detail at kind of housing land supply overall and where things are being factored. I wasn't entirely clear from reading some of the evidence whether this site had already kind of been partially accounted for as kind of within the consented pipeline, or whether it would generally be an additionality. But I think we need to come on to this in more detail.
Just for your clarity, sir, there has been the site was approved by the council once, minded a grant, and then the Section 106 took some time to be determined. It went back to committee and then was refused. So there is a maybe a slight anomaly, shall we say.
Thank you. I think today I want to be obviously focused on the figure that's in policy SP2, thank you, and the soundness of that figure. We will come on to how is the plan going to deliver and meet that requirement and the component parts of the housing trajectory in more detail as part of stage 2. Sorry, I've forgotten your name again from Banks. Sorry, is it Mr. Thompson?
That's right, yeah, yep. Mr. Thompson. Yeah, just looking at the question and concluding really, I think if you look at all the points that we've discussed in isolation, there's a strong argument to be made that increasing the housing numbers above the standard method would be a sensible approach, but obviously when you combine them all together, it really does just magnify the issue that 309 should be uplifted in some way.
Mr. Hutchinson?
Sorry.
That's Mr. Butler.
Thank you, sir. Just to summarise our position, we did make the proposed modification to policy SP2 that the council should not use the standard method based on the 2014 household projections and should produce a much lower housing requirement figure based on the local circumstances evidenced by the 2021 census and the greenbelt constraints that we find ourselves in this borough. And in addition, we've heard a lot about the population projections, and it's not clear to us that there are clear evidence that these increases would be generated in the way that is being suggested. If you look at the current ONS projections, they talk about the growth coming from internal migration rather than any other factors. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herbert.
I just support what Mr Butler and what Mr Hutchinson have just said. It's strange that the 2014 ONS projections are absolutely right and the 2018 ONS projections seem to be totally wrong. So we should be using the more up-to-date figures, to surely more accurate, and they would suggest that we need to build less houses than the 309, certainly more in the region of 150s or 120 in that region. The census figures support that. It would be interesting to see what the 2022 household projections come up with.
Thank you. Before I draw the session to a close, I just want to clarify something in my mind with the council. I appreciate I'm looking at the Regulation 19 plan and what's in this plan. There's obviously references in various representations to a 15% kind of buffer that was looked at as part of previous kind of plan making. Can I just clarify, was that a buffer on land supply or kind of an uplift to housing requirements?
Yes, that was a buffer on land supply, so we'd factored that in at Reg 18 just to account for a change in circumstances between Reg 18 and 19. There was some uncertainties at the time with the plain pitch strategy, so it was just to kind of build in that buffer so that we kind of were accounting for sites falling away between Reg 18 and Reg 19.
Thank you, that's helpful. Yeah, I thought that was the case. I was just trying to be clear in my mind it wasn't a buffer on an uplift on the housing requirement. Thank you. Okay, is there anything further from the council on this point? There's a couple of action points which I'll wrap up with the programme officer to feed through. Thank you everybody for your contributions this morning. I'll now draw the session on the housing need to its conclusion. We'll be back in this room at 2 o'clock for matter 3 when we start looking at the spatial strategy and policy SP3.